of persuasion and of the rhetoric of motion and of energy which she largely created. But then we start thinking about its place in the history of the cinema, as we do about the great chariot race in Ben-Hur, as we do about certain moments in Citizen Kane. It's a very, very unusual case. I do want to stress this, because most other Nazi art and commissioned art, you and I wouldn't lose 30 seconds with. It's trash and it's been forgotten. There's no question this is not the case in Leni Riefenstahl's films.
Diese Art von Schönheit trägt das Zeichen von Auschwitz immer auf der Stirn, und wir müssen es eigentlich, meine ich, mittragen.
To say it's not political is absolute nonsense. It's propaganda, it's advertising, it's powerful. It's still effective now because it happens also to be brilliant filmmaking.
But there is, comment dites-vous, c'est l'exaltation de la force.
With over a dozen of Germany's finest cameramen at her disposal, access to the preparation of the rally, and even a personal elevator built for her to shoot from, high behind Hitler's podium, Riefenstahl's cameras shot over 400,000 feet of film, which she alone then edited. It received its premiere in March 1935 in front of an audience of Nazi VIPs, including the film's rapturous star, Adolf Hitler.
It is, in its visual vocabulary, incredibly eloquent and flexible. But one has to also remember that no documentary film ever before, made anywhere, had been financed on such a generous scale, and had never had so many collaborators, many cameramen and helpers. Something nobody else could have afforded previously.
The rally had become the key event of the Nazi calendar, even before they took power in 1933. Comprising speeches, processions and mass gatherings, it was the nearest a political party could get to displaying its power and prestige in the days before the mass media. The Nazis exploited the form to the full. The annual week-long rally was where the Nazis forged in submission and adulation the relationship between masses and leader. Given the rally's scale and drama, it was then hardly surprising that it was to become a subject for the burgeoning propaganda power of cinema and its ability to intensify the message while extending it to untold millions at home and abroad.
She, of course, became a filmmaker at a time when the art was expanding, when it was possible for cinematic language to say more and more. And what better art than the cinema to capture that sort of choreography of crowd movement, or to celebrate the perfect human form.
Den Kongress des 6. Parteitages eröffne ich mit dem ehrfurchtsvollen Gedenken an den in die Ewigkeit eingegangenen Generalfeldmarschall und Reichspräsidenten von Hindenburg.
This sixth-party rally was Hitler's most important one. 1934 was the first year in which he stood not just as the man elected to be Chancellor, but following the death of Hindenburg as Führer, semi-divine leader with absolute authority. The transition had been a bloody one, with the infamous Night of the Long Knives taking place only a few weeks previously, in which Hitler had assassinated his one-time ally Ernst Röhm, the leader of the Brown Shirts. This left the rally and Riefenstahl's film with a difficult propaganda job on its hands, both to present Hitler as Germany's saviour and, more pressingly, to placate those in the party whose leader he had just murdered.
The guiding principle governing this film, where its social integration lies, is in the particular moment of its making, that is, in 1934. The party had just come to power as a result of a legitimate election, which they had won on a minority vote. They had to do a number of deals to sustain power at that point with the German establishment, including, most specifically, the German army. And to put it crudely, the deal that Hitler forged was to sacrifice his own populist wing. Remember, this was the Nazi, this was the National Socialist Party. This was a party dedicated to a socialist revolution, however misguided it would have been in their hands, say, but it was a populist party, okay? Hitler wiped out his own populist wing in the form of the leadership of the SA, the Brown Shirts. The leader in question was Röhm, and there was the massacre which took place just before the conference started. The purpose of the conference, and therefore the purpose of Triumph of the Will, was to reintegrate the party, to tell everybody that what was going on was legitimate, that the party was not betraying its election manifesto. Everything that's said in the film, almost without exception, is designed specifically to address the problem of the Röhm pushed. She had a perfectly attuned political sense in terms of the internal politics of Nazism. There's no other explanation than that she absolutely knew, and she quite clearly constructed the film according to the bidding of her political masters.
Sie sind Deutschland. Wenn Sie handeln, handelt die Nation. Wenn Sie richten, richtet das Volk.
But Riefenstahl's skill with political public relations was not what first drew Hitler to her. Before 1933, she had been far more famous as first a dancer and then as the star of a number of what were called mountain films, action melodramas daringly shot in the Alps and the Dolomites and which were massively popular. In 1932, she had taken to directing as well as starring, creating the classic of the genre, The Blue Light. These films developed new camera techniques, marrying them to storylines of lonely heroism in the bleached landscape of the mountaintop. Romantic, exhilarating, sublimely kitsch, precisely the qualities that Hitler so radically decided should grace the film versions of his rallies.
One of the reasons why Hitler was attracted to Leni Riefenstahl as a filmmaker was because he was attracted to her, for one thing, but he liked the ideas of the mountain films. And I think he thought that those ideas could translate well into making nature out of spectacular culture. In the mountain films, you get this very strong sense of a longing for purity and transcendence, and for a fusion with ecstatic, sublime nature. And I think in the way that gets translated into Triumph of the Will is that instead of the mountain, it's Hitler as the embodiment of National Socialism.
Clearly, with Leni Riefenstahl, the electricity took. The great arc of energy passed between them and between her and those thugs. One has only to look at the photos of her standing between the SS and SR thugs to realize the empathy is almost complete. Very striking. Leni Riefenstahl is totally at home in what she's doing and projecting and admiring, at home in Nazism. She was to them that rarest thing, the Valkyrie of the film, the woman in whom beauty, courage, elegance, violence somehow still endured with an essential femininity. It was dynamite.
The truth is that she was commissioned to do it by Hitler himself and by the Nazi Party, and why did they choose her if they didn't know what they could expect from her?
Riefenstahl not only hobnobbed with, not only admired, not only flattered, but certainly at every deep level caught up, captured and gave back to them the very nasty magic of their own image of themselves. This is an active mirror. She was an eye that was both a mirror of the horror and a creator of its veneer.
But Riefenstahl could never have made Triumph of the Will if it hadn't been for Victory of Faith, the film she made of the previous year's rally, also held in Nuremberg. Here she gave early evidence of how easily she would adapt from fiction to propaganda, justifying Hitler's decision to use her. The film ironically celebrated the relationship between Hitler and the soon-to-be assassinated Röhm. Victory of Faith was seen by over 20 million people and won her Hitler's personal applause at its premiere.
Well, Sieg des Glaubens is very much a dry run, I think, for Triumph of the Will, and it's a much shorter film, obviously a far smaller budget. And I think you could in effect describe it as Triumph of the Will without the gloss. You can see the frayed edges in the film. Well, what you can already see in Sieg des Glaubens is the organisation of the material into a more effective whole, the use of movement, dynamic movement in different directions.
Riefenstahl's ambitions for Triumph of the Will were huge. In an interview given to the Nazi paper, the Völkische Beobachter, on the eve of the rally, she laid them out for all to read.
It will be my difficult task to make this year's rally film reach even greater heights than last year's. This time, the film will have to be not just a pure record of the rally, rather the rally will itself be the crowning glory of a truly great National Socialist film, capturing, as though by lightning, the rise and victory of National Socialism.
And she was to prove as good as her word. The film, Triumph of the Will, is barely seconds old before it is clear what a step forward Riefenstahl had made from Victory of Faith. This is the famous opening sequence. Germany's salvation comes from the clouds, from outside history. The beginning is already a climax, the meeting of the marching faithful and the descending leader, a mixture of Wagnerian god, Nazi eagle, and 20th century bomber.
Clouds open like veils and reveal the city of Nuremberg, and the shadow of the plane runs over the ancient houses and streets, touching marching columns who are on the move to welcome Hitler. That is accompanied by the Meistersinger overture, which fuses Hitler and his divine mission with the ancient traditions of Nuremberg. So that is a consciously concocted sequence. It is immensely effective still today.
It's evident that the way to show him arriving at this great rally, and Speer had created these cathedrals of light into which the Führer arrives, was to have him descend through the clouds. The opening images of Triumph of the Will are the clouds. He's coming from the heavens, and like a god, he appears in this silver airplane. Then you build up and build up. She builds and builds the people waiting and expectant. It was only serving the master, who was Hitler, and Hitler's idea of himself as a sort of a new messiah. I mean, here I am. I'm sitting on a stage of an advertising film. The Triumph of the Will was an advertising film. There's no doubt about it. That's all it was. But it was a very powerful one. It happened to be 4 hours long. And if you look at it today, it's extremely tedious. On the other hand, there are some memorable and powerful, lasting images that I think have affected many filmmakers.
She challenges us to say, are you not moved as I was? Have I not moved you very deeply to some momentary burst of passionate ecstasy? Don't you too want to march with us? There was, as we've said, a deep correspondence between her particular gifts and Nazism. For instance, the Oceanic movement. That is to say, the eyes first downcast, then level, then suddenly a wave coming through a vast crowd of eyes turning up towards the columns of steel, towards the Nazi eagle, towards the great leaders on the podium. The quite astonishing sense of the crowd as ocean, as an ocean being passed through by immense currents, a tidal wave. You expect that crowd to peak into a tidal wave. Secondly, in a way, nobody else, I think, has quite done. Her marching masses, her marching groups are not inert. They're not silly. Very, very often, also among great filmmakers, I'm thinking of certain crowd scenes in Korda, they haven't quite got it right. People marching look like sheep or geese or whatever. They look fundamentally stupid, and they look like automatons. Not in Leni Riefenstahl. I don't know how this is done. The sinews of the marchers, their hands, their joint motion still shows you an individual becoming part of something much larger than himself. He grows in front of you. Yes, technicians will be able to tell us, shoot from below, shoot shoulders, shoot boots. Fine, and I respect these explanations very much, but they're not really the essence. She has a way of making the march, and Arsène, she had a famous series called The March of Time. The role of marching in modern history, one thinks of Yeats's songs at almost the same date, the pounding of boots, the blue shirts in Ireland, marching, marching. She has given us the great pictorial equivalent of that. I would then say that the way she uses fire and night, here the precedent is certainly very deeply German. Wind, fire, motion. Fire as a cleanser, fire as light, fire as a purifier, and fire as a menace. There are also quite astonishing shots simply of granite, of marble. She can bring stone to vibrant life. And there she and Speer are the two geniuses. This is Sparta. Our bodies are Sparta, but also our stadiums. Our weapons are Sparta, but also our assembly halls. Now, millions of people, not only in Germany, were swept up into the imaged magic of Nazi propaganda. Millions of people had a certain sense, never forget, it came out of hunger, unemployment. It came out of a humiliation of the body which the Germans felt utterly and utterly. When you see their great expressionist artists, George Grosz and others, the skeletons back from the First World War, the Hungary of Weimar, the unemployed. This woman said, I will give you back a kind of drunkenness of the body. On a mountaintop, in a field, you're going to be not only at home in your own flesh again, but it's going to absolutely shine through your soul. It is important to know that this appealed to millions and millions of people, as did Speer's architecture and organization, as did the Nazi use of Wagnerian music, as did the youth camps, the gymnastics, the dancing.
Sieg Heil!
There is a sort of great meeting point in terms of the means that were available to her as a filmmaker and as somebody favored by the Nazi Party. We have to remember that Triumph of the Will came only 7 years after the beginning of the sound era. And so the marching, the clicks, the guns, the everything, she was in the right place at the right time to celebrate those very aspects with her new art form.
She changed the way of looking at things. Purely technically, she changed things. The use of long focus lenses, the use of slow motion, the juxtaposition of images, and there's great beauty in the photography and the framing and the way she uses music against the image, the pure strength of image, and the juxtaposition of the subject matter. That combination, it was potent and frightening.
But technique does not answer the central question of Riefenstahl's cinematography. Where does the 1934 rally end and her art begin? At what point does actuality become propaganda?
Je ne suis pas sûr que ce soit un documentaire. Un documentaire, en principe, c'est un film documentaire. C'est un film qui filme la réalité. Or, je pense que là, c'est tout à fait autre chose, qu'il s'agit d'un spectacle. Et si ce film est un documentaire, cela signifie que la réalité est un spectacle.
Where Leni Riefenstahl's great art as a documentary filmmaker in Triumph of the Will came through was her ability to capture on film what was happening at the rally, that emotional frenzy that was taking place. The use of telephoto lenses to pick out faces in the crowd and to capture the emotions on those faces and to show them in close-up in the film. They were there, rather she showed them with her telephoto lenses or not. Those frenzied faces in the crowd were there. And showing them in the film, I don't think is a propaganda statement.
Heil, Arbeitsmänner! Heil, mein Führer! Kamerad, woher stammst du? Aus Friesenland. Und du, Kamerad? Aus Bayern. Und du? Vom Kaiserstuhl. Und du? Aus Pommern. Und aus Königsberg. Aus Schlesien. Von der Waterkant. Vom Schwarzwald.
Et ce qui m'a frappé, c'est que le film est entièrement mis en scène. But not only the film is staged, but the reality, this means Party Day in 1934 in Nuremberg is staged too. But and there is l'exaltation de la force. Et le film est une sorte d'épiphénomène, d'une certaine façon, de la cérémonie elle-même. On dirait que sans le film, il n'y a pas de Parteitag. Et sans le Parteitag, évidemment, il n'y a pas de film. Les deux choses sont complètement imbriquées.
It goes far above the, say, objective, detached reporting camera of the newsreel. It goes into it. It goes into that dream, that utopia, that enthusiasm. The way she sees people's love for him is very interesting. Women ecstatically biting their lips, children being held up to him, but also it goes into the sort of the vocabulary of male, possibly homosexual love. Buckles and helmets and leatherwork, glistening like blessed by the divine sex object. One editing device used to greatest effect were the mixes and dissolves at the end of scenes. Various rhapsodic chapters of the film are edited up into a climax, which are accompanied by very elegant and slow dissolves. These are pivotal to this whole alchemy of symbolism. All these are discoveries, and Leni Riefenstahl made them work within this film, which at the end is possibly the most potent film glorifying Nazism and what it stands for.
Hitler intended Riefenstahl's film to survive as more than just a chronicle of his autumn rally, but as a dynamic picture of Germany embarking on its 1,000-year Reich. It was a film that had no need for explicit commentary, preferring to persuade by staged image rather than by polemic. No one who saw the film in 1934 was in any doubt. This was a film that meant what it said.
I was 12 years old when Triumph of the Will was shown on German cinema. I was fascinated and I felt fear because I felt the aggressive power of these marching units. I felt that they would do things to people like me which one couldn't imagine at that time. One should not forget, when Triumph of the Will was made in 1934, there had already been the boycott of all Jewish shops, lawyers, and my father was a lawyer, and doctors. There had already been the burning of books. There had already been the establishment of certain concentration camps. So somebody who makes a film for this party knows what he is glorifying. So the film demonstrates the power of the party, the beauty and the strength of this master race, the superior race, which means that if people saw this film, they would be prepared to follow their Führer to the end. They would be prepared to die for him and to kill for him.
In one way, the film is frightening. And I think that if I would have seen the film in 1934, when it was made, or in 1935, there were good reasons to be afraid. It's clear that there is a preparation for war. It's clear that the whole of Germany is already a camp.
Watching Triumph of the Will today, however, gives it a different, ominous power. Burdened as we are with knowledge that no one, not even Riefenstahl, could have had in 1935, her film has become a record of both what passed before her cameras in Nuremberg and also, arguably, of where it was all going to lead.
When you see the kitchens and even the flames of the furnace where they prepare the food, on the chimneys even, you can see at the end of the line the furnaces of Auschwitz.
Ein Volk, das nicht auf die Reinheit seiner Rasse hält, geht zugrunde.
Triumph of the Will was to be the second of 4 films Riefenstahl made during the Nazi period. In 1935, she directed a half-hour film celebrating the German army, again using the cream of Germany's film and sound technicians. It was commissioned by Hitler to promote the idea of rearmament. Called Tag der Freiheit, or Day of Freedom, it was used as a propaganda mainstay till the end of the 30s, both as a cinema short and as an educational film shown in schools. But it is Olympia, the record of the 1936 Berlin Olympics, that stands alongside Triumph of the Will as her great masterpiece. This 2-part, 4-hour film was Riefenstahl's finest hour, and some would argue also the Olympic film's finest hour. Nazi Germany was quick to recognize Riefenstahl's value, repeatedly bestowing on her their highest film awards, here presented by the man she claimed hated her, Joseph Goebbels.
Der Deutsche Filmpreis 1937-38 wurde Frau Leni Riefenstahl für ihr Filmwerk Olympia, Fest der Völker, Fest der Schönheit zuerkannt.
There were to be more triumphal landings for Riefenstahl, picking up prizes for her films in France and Italy. But few were sweeter than this, her arrival in an Austria only recently annexed by Hitler's Reich to attend the Vienna premiere of Olympia. This was the first of a dozen European capitals the Reich paid her to visit to promote her film.
Ich danke Ihnen vielmals für Ihre freundlichen Willkommensworte und ich bin sehr, sehr glücklich, dass ich nach Wien kommen konnte und die Uraufführung in Wien miterleben kann. Seit 5 Jahren war ich nicht in Wien gewesen und es ist das erste Mal, seit ich, nachdem unser Führer die Macht ergriffen hat, hier sein darf.
But not everyone was prepared to lay out a red carpet for her. Later in 1938, a few days after Germany's first big anti-Jewish pogrom, Kristallnacht, she arrived in America to seek US distribution of her Olympic film. She was invited to visit Hollywood by Hal Roach, but the rest of the film community reacted angrily. Screenwriter Bud Schulberg helped organize a boycott of her visit, commemorated in a whistleblowing article written after the war. She left Los Angeles empty-handed, with only Walt Disney prepared to speak to her.
We decided to boycott the banquet and to publicize the fact that that's the way that people felt, not so much personally about Leni Riefenstahl, but that through the boycott we would tell the world how we felt about the growing danger of Hitlerism.
Their paths were to cross again, this time in a very different world, the defeated and devastated Germany of 1946, where Schulberg was stationed as part of American military intelligence, gathering film evidence for the Nuremberg hearings.
Ironically, I was given the assignment to find Riefenstahl. No one knew exactly where she was. They had a good idea through intelligence. She was somewhere in Bavaria. And we kept looking for her. And finally found her in a lovely chalet on a lake in Bavaria. And I was a young Navy lieutenant. And I went in to see her and sat with her on the couch overlooking the lake and talked to her. And she asked me where I came from. Just from, I think I said Los Angeles, but she started to, in a sense, to protest that she was very misunderstood and that she had never been pro-Nazi, never been pro-Hitler. It was simply a pure artist working in cinema. And then she told me the story that she said, I went to Hollywood in 1938, and just hundreds and hundreds of people from the film industry came out to honor me, and in Hollywood nobody felt that I was a Nazi and so forth. I sat there listening to all this and laughing really to myself. I didn't, and of course she had no idea who I was. Not that she would recognize me in any way, but she had no idea. And I was thinking back, well, that just only what 5 or 6 or 7 years can do, because in my pocket was a document that was burning a hole in my pocket. I actually had a warrant for her to bring her to Nuremberg. I did assure her that she wasn't being charged with any war crimes, but she would be held in a sense as like a material witness at a trial. And off we drove to Nuremberg. She was not very happy about it. No, but it had come kind of full circle.
Since the war, Riefenstahl made only one more feature film, a gypsy melodrama called Lowland. She re-emerged in the 70s as a best-selling photographer of Sudanese tribespeople and more recently of marine life. But it is her attitude of injured virtue that has kept her in the public eye. For 40 years, she has maintained a campaign to clear her reputation of complicity with the Nazi regime, most recently reaffirmed in the 1987 autobiography translated into English last autumn. Despite having been declared a Mitläufer, or fellow traveller, by a denazification tribunal, she has consistently protested that she was an artist who knew nothing of politics, and that her films were not propaganda, but records of pure history. Or, as she put it earlier this year,
Triumph of the Will is not a party film. There's nothing ideological in it. It is a film of peace.
Not surprisingly, it is this unapologetic stance that has made her such a controversial figure.
It reminds me of the argument of Alexander Mitscherlich, Die Unfähigkeit zu trauern, his book, The Incapability to Mourn. There were many, many people, opportunists and active participants of that regime, who never, ever showed a sign of remorse for what they have done or what they enabled the regime to do. And I think that is the tragedy, that she never could leap over her own shadow.
Ich glaube, sie ist schon eine Person, der man sagen könnte, sie ist ein Teil dieser Partei und ich meine nicht mit dem Buch und dem Abzeichen, aber sie war Ausdruck dieses Willens der Bewegung aber auch als Zeitgeist und Zeitstil